I didn't raise my voice, didn't demand answers, didn't ask them why, because I already knew. I'd made myself too easy to erase, too quiet in my loyalty, too generous without condition, and now they thought I'd just accept it. The next morning, I brewed coffee in silence. The machine hissed softly in my kitchen steel, spotless mind. Outside Charleston was waking slowly, under a gray November sky. My phone buzzed. A message from Lila. Let's not make this bigger than it is. You know Dad loved you. I stared at it. Not a single apology. Not even a trace of remorse. Just a reminder to stay silent. To protect the illusion, to keep playing my role. But I was done playing. I pulled out my laptop and opened the folder labeled Family Holdings. Secured. Dozens of documents, every agreement, every wire transfer, every silent rescue I'd executed behind the scenes. They built their legacy on my belief that someday I'd be invited in, that someday I'd belong. But they chose erasure. So I chose clarity. I chose justice, not the dramatic kind, not explosive, just the kind that quietly rewrites the rules. I picked up my phone again, called my attorney, begin withdrawal proceedings, all capital, immediate effect. There was a pause, then a quiet understood. My hands didn't shake, my voice didn't waver, but inside something finally settled. Not revenge, not bitterness, just peace. Cold, precise peace. Because if you remove me from your story, I will remove my part in building it. So tell me, if your family erased your name, would you still protect theirs? Would you keep giving, or would you take everything they never thanked you for? Where are you listening from tonight, and have you ever stood outside your own legacy, watching it handed to someone else? I wasn't born with power. I built it one sacrifice at a time. After college, while Edward was handed a VP title on his first day at Whitmore Holdings, I was renting a one-bedroom above a laundromat in Columbia. The kitchen faucet leaked. The heater clanked in the middle of the night like it was choking on regret. But I had 2 monitors, a second-hand coffee machine, and a business plan scribbled across my fridge in dry erase marker. Whitmore Ventures wasn't born in a boardroom. It was born between gas station coffees and investor rejections. And I didn't take a dime from my family, not because they didn't have it, because they never offered. At every holiday dinner, I was the one without stories worth telling. No photos in the company newsletter. No seat at the head table. Edward always sat beside Dad. Lila had Joanne's approval. She played the role, well heels, pearls law school, smile. I brought spreadsheets and vision. No one asked to see either. Still, I kept giving. When the market turned in 2020, Edward called. Voice tight, trying to sound casual. Just a small cash flow crunch. Temporary. I wired $18 million within 3 days. No questions. No contracts. Then came Lila's legal scandal, some ethics complaint that nearly derailed her partnership. I made it disappear through a favor from one of my own board contacts. It cost me 2 years of credibility with that fund, but I never told her. And when Joanne's breast cancer returned in 2022, I covered her private treatment in Boston. She never knew the name on the wire. Because that's who I was. The invisible pillar, strong enough to carry the family, forgettable enough to leave out of the photo. But it wasn't always this way. There was a time before money, before legacy, when Dad still saw me, before Edward's shadow stretched across every room, before success had a uniform I refused to wear. I still remember sitting on the porch steps with him one summer night, knees touching fingers sticky from melted popsicles. You think different, Cass, he said. Not better, not worse. But it'll cost you. I didn't understand it then, but I do now. It cost me a seat at the table. By 2023, Whitmore Ventures was managing over $300 million in assets. Our office had moved from that tiny co-working space downtown to a glass building on East Bay. We had a lobby, a receptionist, a view of the harbor. But what I was proudest of was the wall. Inside our conference room, framed headshots of every woman-owned startup we funded, each one with her own war story. Each one once told she was too late, too inexperienced, too difficult. They weren't just investments, they were reminders of what I never got and what I could still give. Still, when the call came from Edward in late spring, I picked up. Liquidity issue, he said, sounding out of breath. A new construction deal fell through short term, just need a bridge loan. He didn't say thank you when I wired $22 million. He did send a bottle of scotch with a note. You always come through, E. Not a contract, not a formal agreement, just 10 words and a vintage I didn't even drink. At the next family dinner, no one mentioned the loan. No one even asked how my firm was doing. Joanne talked about Edward's expansion into the Atlanta market. Dad, already slowing from the chemo, beamed with pride. Lila shared her newest courtroom win. And I sat there sipping sparkling water, wearing a dress I'd had tailored 3 times just to feel like it belonged. They toasted to legacy, to what the Whitmores have built. No one looked my way. Later that night, as I drove home along the bridge, I turned off the radio. Charleston lights shimmered across the dark water. I didn't cry, I didn't rage, but I couldn't stop replaying that moment when Dad leaned across the table, eyes tired but clear, and said, "Edward's the future. Lila keeps us stable. We're lucky to have them." Then he lifted his glass. Here's to the next generation, as if I weren't even in the room. I went home and took off the dress, hung it up like armor I didn't need anymore. Then I sat at the edge of my bed and stared at the small brass box on my nightstand, the one that held my mother's watch. It hadn't ticked in decades, but I kept it wound, just in case, because some things are worth remembering, even if no one else does. A week before Dad died, he asked to see me, just me. We sat in the sunroom where the light came through sheer curtains and settled on the hardwood like dust from another time. He was thinner. His hands shook slightly as he reached for the tea Joanne had set out. "You still working too much?" he asked. I smiled. "It's either that or watch other people build what I could have built." He chuckled, then coughed. There was a long silence. Then he looked at me. "Cass, I don't understand what you do, but I respect it." It was the closest thing to validation he ever gave me, and it came like a stranger offering flowers you forgot you asked for. But I took it, because we take crumbs when the feast is never offered. The next day, Joanne told me he'd updated the will. Nothing major, she said, just clarifications. I didn't ask, I didn't expect, but a quiet part of me, the one that remembered those popsicle nights, hoped maybe he'd seen me. Really seen me. One last time. The funeral was muted and meticulous. Joanne wore navy, not black. Edward gave the eulogy full of references to legacy integrity and Whitmore tradition. Lila dabbed her eyes in rhythm with the camera flashes. I sat in the second row, not beside Joanne, not near Edward, just behind, invisible again, but wide awake this time. Afterward, I went back to the estate for the reading. You already know how that ended, but what I haven't said is this. As I drove away that night, I didn't feel grief. I felt cold, not the kind that chills, the kind that clarifies, like glass. And in that silence, a question bloomed. What if I stopped pretending I was part of this family at all? What if the only legacy I ever needed was the one I built with my own hands? Have you ever given everything only to realize it was never going to be enough? Have you ever been expected to be generous and silent? If that's you, I see you. And I promise there's more to your story than the part they left you out of. Share your thoughts in the comments. Where are you listening from? Subscribe to Sophia's Revenge Stories for real stories about justice, legacy, and women reclaiming their place one truth at a time. The gala was announced through a press release. Whitmore Holdings celebrates 40 years of legacy and leadership. I read about it in the Charleston Business Journal, a full-page feature, a smiling photo of Edward shaking hands with the governor, a quote from Lila about the strength of family tradition. My name wasn't there. I scrolled twice, checked the caption, Clicked through to the official website. Nothing. No mention of the capital I'd injected. No trace of the venture arm I'd quietly funded under their umbrella. No footnote, no asterisk. I was a ghost. 2 days later, I received an invitation in the mail. Heavy cardstock gold trim, embossed seal, but not addressed to me directly. Just Ms. Cassandra Whitmore, guest. Not founder, not partner, not even daughter of the late Judge Whitmore. I held it in my hands for a long time, let the weight of it settle. It wasn't oversight. It was intention. They were rewriting history without me in it. I forwarded the invitation to my executive assistant. Decline with regrets, I typed. Then paused, added politely, for now. That same evening, my assistant knocked on my door, a strange look on her face. Have you seen this? She asked, placing a folder on my desk. It was a media deck. Edward's team had accidentally CC'd us on the gala sponsor kit. Inside breakdown of partnerships, projected investor returns, a list of Whitmore legacy contributors. Lila, Joanne, even Edward's college roommate whose contribution was apparently emotional support. No Cass, no mention of Whitmore Ventures, no trace of my $40 million. But there on page 7, under key growth milestones, I saw something familiar. A graph. My graph. Same projection curve, same layout. Even the typo in the 2021 caption I'd pointed out to Edward months ago still there. They had lifted my internal report, used it without credit, without permission, and packaged it as Edward's vision. My throat didn't tighten, my chest didn't burn, but something inside me tilted. A slow, irrevocable shift. Not rage, not sadness, just clarity. I didn't plan to attend, but something pulled me there. Not to be seen, but to see. The gala was held at the historic rice mill brick walls, chandeliers, coastal wind curling through the dockside. A valet opened my door without looking twice. I walked in alone. Inside the room buzzed with money, men in navy suits, women in pale silk, a jazz trio in the corner, glassware catching light like diamonds. I stayed near the back, away from the cameras. No name tag, no introduction. I wasn't expected. That was the point. Edward stood near the podium, flanked by sponsors and city officials. He laughed too loud, gestured too wide, a man performing certainty. Lila circled the room like a PR shark, smiling, posing, adjusting her neckline with each photo. She passed me once, paused. Cass, she said, voice bright. You made it, I nodded. She didn't hug me, didn't touch my arm, just scanned my face like I was a distant cousin who had crashed a wedding. They're about to show the tribute video, she said. You'll love it. And then she was gone. I found a seat near the back, close enough to see, far enough to disappear again. The lights dimmed, a hush fell, the screen lit up. Whitmore Holdings, a legacy of vision. Old black and white photos faded into shots of Dad shaking hands. Ribbon cuttings, courthouse steps. Then Edward, first shovel in the ground. Then Lila cutting a red ribbon in a fitted blazer. Then Joanne standing beside Dad at a charity gala in 2006. Then more buildings, more handshakes, more legacy. No me, not even a childhood photo, not even the scholarship fund I created in Dad's name. When the lights came back on, the room applauded, a standing ovation, except me. I sat still, hands folded, jaw relaxed. That's when I noticed the woman beside me glance at my place card. Her brow furrowed. You're Cassandra Whitmore? I nodded. She tilted her head. You weren't in the video. No judgment, just confusion. I smiled. That's all right, I said quietly. I'm used to being edited out. She didn't know what to say. No one ever does. After the tribute video, they unveiled a plaque, the Whitmore Wall of Founders, brass, marble, 12 names etched beneath the family crest. Dad's name led the list, then Joanne, then Edward, then Lila. They read each one aloud, told stories, laughed, cried. I stood in the back, one hand around a flute of untouched champagne. The bubbles rose and popped against the rim. When they finished, Edward tapped the mic. Tonight we honor not just history, but the people who made that history possible. He turned to the wall behind him. This legacy is built on commitment, sacrifice, and vision. Someone clapped. Others followed. But I heard the silence behind his words. The names not spoken, the truth omitted. I set the glass down, walked out quietly, coat over my arm heels, silent on the old hardwood. Outside, the breeze from the harbor carried salt and silence. My driver opened the door. I got in. He asked, "Everything all right, Miss Whitmore?" I looked out the window as the rice mill faded into the background. Lights flickered behind the old bricks, like ghosts of a legacy I'd helped build. "Just fine," I said, "but I think it's time I edit something too." When I got home, I went straight to my office, opened my safe, pulled out the original investment docs. There it was, my signature, my capital, my terms. No gratitude required. But withdrawal was always an option. I sat down, opened a new document, typed a subject line, "Initiate full capital reversal, Whitmore Holdings." I didn't hit send, not yet. I just let the screen glow back at me, a silent mirror to everything they didn't see. Would you press send? Would you pull back everything they took for granted? Or would you stay, hoping just one more time they might finally see you? Would you fight back or stay silent for family peace? Comment below, your voice matters here. Subscribe to Sophia's Revenge Stories for more quiet justice, real closure, and stories that say what you've always wanted to. It started with a slip of paper. I wasn't looking for it. I was organizing the shelves in Dad's study, sorting the things Joanne hadn't bothered to touch since the funeral. She said I could take what I wanted, but I didn't come for keepsakes. I came for answers. There, wedged inside a blue folder labeled Estate Final Drafts, was a single page creased, yellowing slightly at the edges. It wasn't on legal paper, just a printed Word doc with my father's name at the top. And mine, cast to receive 25% Class B equity plus full voting control upon death, dated 6 months before he died, signed, witnessed, notarized. My chest didn't rise. I held my breath without noticing, as if even air might disturb what I had just found. I flipped the page. Attached was an email printout from Dad to Edward, subject discussed before final notarization. Date 2 weeks after that document. I've changed the equity distribution. Cass has earned more than a footnote. We'll talk this weekend. I checked the date again. It was a Wednesday. He died that Sunday. I sat down in his chair, worn leather, still holding the faint scent of old aftershave and cigar ash. The email had never been replied to. No response, no comment, just silence. But I knew what that meant. That version of the will never made it to the lawyer, never got entered into probate. I was cut out after being written in. Someone made sure of that. Edward. It had to be Edward. He had access. He had motive, and he had the nerve to read my name off a guest list like I was some distant family friend. This wasn't omission. This was erasure. Planned, clean, deliberate. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk Dad once ruled from. I looked around, books on jurisprudence, photos of him in robes, and in that moment I felt nothing but a quiet certainty. If they thought I wouldn't notice, they never really knew me at all. I didn't confront Edward, not yet. Instead, I asked Sarah, my assistant, to get me a copy of the final probate filing. She didn't ask why. She never does. Within hours, she sent over the file. I printed every page, laid them out across my dining table like pieces of a broken promise. Dad's signature was there, yes, but not on the version I found. This one split everything between Edward, Lila, and Joanne. It even included a paragraph thanking them for their tireless commitment to the Whitmore legacy. My name only in a footnote. One sentence. Cassandra Whitmore has been financially independent for decades and is not in need of additional inheritance. That was it. Not beloved daughter, not co-investor, not even survivor. Just a cold, calculated dismissal. I stared at the sentence for a long time. Tried to imagine Dad writing those words. But the voice in my head didn't sound like his. It sounded like Edward's. Because I remembered 3 years ago. Dinner at the estate. Just the four of us. Joanne had made coq au vin. Dad had just come back from a round of chemo. He looked tired but proud. I think Cass should help restructure the holdings, he said over dessert. She's the only one who sees both sides, business and human. Edward had laughed. Not mockingly, but with that polished tone he used when trying to redirect power. Cass doesn't need to get her hands dirty. She's already built her empire. He raised his glass to me, smiling. To the sibling who doesn't need our mess. Dad hesitated. His hand twitched on the linen napkin, but he didn't argue. Joanne changed the subject. Lila poured more wine. And I said nothing. Because back then I thought silence was the high road, that keeping peace was the same as keeping dignity. I was wrong. Silence isn't dignity, it's permission, and I had given it too many times. Now they had taken my name, my place, my history, and they expected me to thank them for leaving me alone. I took the page, the version Dad had signed, and slid it into a separate folder, labeled it before erasure. Then I opened my laptop, created a timeline, email date, signature date, death date, filing date. It all fit, too neatly. The change hadn't been accidental. It was surgical, executed in the quiet gap between decline and death, the kind of move that required access, an absence of conscience. I remembered the hospice nurse mentioning Edward had handled everything that final weekend. I hadn't been called. I was told he'd slipped away peacefully. Now I wondered who had been in the room when the last decisions were made. Legacy isn't just about money, it's about who tells the story. And mine had been edited by someone with a lot to lose. I called an old colleague, Melina, estate litigator turned private advisor. We hadn't spoken in over a year. She picked up on the second ring. Cass, you all right? I need a review of a probate trail, I said. Possibly 2 wills, possibly suppression. Her voice dropped an octave. I'm listening. I sent her the scanned files, waited. 10 minutes later, she called back. This isn't a maybe, Cass. This is actionable. If you want to go forward. I didn't answer immediately because part of me still hesitated. Not for their sake, for mine. Once I went down this road, there would be no more family dinners, no cautious reconciliations, only silence, maybe public fallout, maybe lawsuits. But then I looked at the envelope still on my desk, the one that held the invitation to Joanne's birthday garden brunch, the one I never RSVP'd to. The return address read, Whitmore Estate, for immediate family only. And that's when I knew they had already made their choice. They had drawn the line, erased me. All I had left to decide was whether I'd let them. If your name was written out of your own bloodline, would you rewrite it in ink? Or let the page turn without you? I inched the paper tray back into place and pressed print. The machine hummed. 1 page, then 2, then 7, transaction logs, transfer slips, wire confirmations, black ink, white paper, 8 figures at the bottom, no edits, no explanations, just proof. Proof that I had been the safety net beneath their legacy. Proof that they had never once said thank you. The pages were warm in my hands. I stacked them slowly, neatly, no staples. Let the weight speak for itself. Edward was in his office at the main building. The Whitmore crest still hung behind his desk, brass against navy velvet, a relic of respectability. He looked up when I walked in. Didn't stand, didn't smile. Cass. Flat. Neutral, like he'd been expecting me, but hoped I wouldn't come. I won't take much of your time, I said, my voice steady, unapologetic. I set the folder down between us. He glanced at it. Didn't open it, didn't touch it. What's this history, I said. Mine and yours. He exhaled through his nose, leaned back. Look, Cass, if this is about the estate, it's not, I cut in. I've accepted what I wasn't given, but this, I tapped the folder. This is what I gave. What I built, what I saved. Finally, he opened it. His eyes moved over the first page, then the second, faster now. When he hit the fifth page, his jaw set. He closed the folder, looked up. You kept all of it, yes. You documented everything I believed in accountability, even when no one asked me to. He nodded once. No apology, no denial, just the faintest flicker of discomfort. I never asked you to bail us out, he said. You didn't have to. You knew I would. He looked down at the folder again, like it was starting to burn. You came here for what he asked. To guilt me, shame me, no, I said. I came here so you'd never be able to say you didn't know. Edward didn't reach for the folder again. He just stared at it, like it might start speaking for me. But I had already said everything I needed to. I'm not here to collect a debt, I said. I'm not asking for applause. He leaned back slowly, arms crossed, voice flat. Then what exactly do you want, Cass? I looked around his office. The framed articles, the awards, the family photo on the bookshelf one I wasn't in. I want you to remember, I said. Every time you walk past that Whitmore crest, every time you shake hands with a man who still thinks this company is solvent because of your leadership. He said nothing, didn't defend, didn't deny, but his fingers tapped once on the desk, sharp, controlled, like he was buying time. You know, he finally said, you always did act like you were above us. I almost laughed. Instead, I straightened. I never wanted to be above anyone. I just didn't want to be beneath everyone. I picked up my purse, paused, then slid one final page out of the folder and placed it on top. It was a snapshot of the internal report, the same one he had used in his gala presentation. Still bearing the watermark in the bottom corner, Whitmore Ventures, Cassandra Whitmore. He stared at it. This time he understood. I turned toward the door. I'm not coming to the garden brunch, I said. You can take me off the list again. He didn't respond, didn't even look up. But as I closed the door behind me, I caught my own reflection in the glass wall. Back straight, hands still, eyes clear. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like remembering who I was and making sure they remembered too. When I got back to my office, I placed the folder in the bottom drawer of my desk, locked it, not out of fear, out of ritual. Closure needs ceremony. I didn't cry, I didn't shake. I made tea, sat by the window, watched the sun fade behind Charleston's skyline. Orange light stretching like truth finally catching up. If they never saw your worth, would you show them? Or let them lose it on their own? The next morning, I opened a new file, labeled it Exit Strategy, Phase 1. I wasn't rushing. This wasn't retaliation, it was realignment. I started by listing every asset tied to Whitmore Holdings. Not just the ones I had invested in, the ones I had rescued, silently. Line by line, I tracked the equity I held directly and indirectly. Some were through shell funds, some through convertible notes, some through board proxies who never even knew they were voting with my blessing. I built it like scaffolding, invisible. But without it, everything would collapse. They had forgotten that. Or maybe they never bothered to understand. Sarah walked in mid-morning with my second coffee. She paused when she saw the folders open across the table. Want me to clear your afternoon? She asked gently. I looked up, met her eyes. She knew. Yes, I said. No calls, just prep. She nodded and stepped out. I turned back to the documents. The numbers no longer looked like money. They looked like leverage, and I wasn't planning to swing it blindly. I called my legal counsel Ana Torres, smart, unflinching, the kind of woman who didn't blink at billion-dollar exits or blood-thin betrayals. I need you to draft a full disengagement protocol, I said. No noise, no litigation yet, just readiness. Ana didn't ask why, didn't make it emotional. Okay, she said. I'll begin with capital recovery provisions. Target timeline 30 days. Got it. Anything else? Yes, I added. No communication goes through me. All formal, all legal. If they wanted to ask why, they could ask their lawyers. By Friday, I had a list of every operating partner still connected to Whitmore Holdings through my funds. 16 names, 12 of them women. I sent them each a short message, neutral in tone, firm in intent. Effective Q3, Whitmore Ventures will be reassessing capital alignment and withdrawing from select strategic positions. I'd love to discuss your options going forward. Within hours, half had replied. The other half sent assistants scrambling to schedule calls. None of them were loyal to Edward. They were loyal to outcomes, and I had delivered those. By Monday, Anna's draft was ready. 53 pages, structured, detailed, every clause triple reviewed. It was in every way surgical. I forwarded it to Gregory, my CFO. He'd been with me since the first real office when we used folding chairs and took client calls in the hallway to avoid echo. He called immediately. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked. His voice wasn't surprised, just steady. "I'm done being the hidden investor," I said. "If they want the capital, they'll have to face the name behind it." He didn't try to talk me out of it, didn't use the word bridge or cooling off. Instead, he said, "I'll alert compliance and move our offshore block quietly." That afternoon, I walked into the boardroom, the one with the wall of women's portraits I'd built over 7 years. I paused at the newest frame. A young founder from Atlanta, single mom, former nurse, now building a logistics tech platform that had cut delivery times by 32% for regional hospitals. Her smile was tired but proud, not unlike mine in the early days. I touched the glass just once, then turned toward the cabinet, pulled out a fresh binder, and labeled it Legacy Shift. Because this wasn't just about Whitmore anymore. It was about what came next. Once the silence was broken, once the debt, the loyalty, the blind giving all stopped. By the end of the week, the dominoes were quietly tilting. Compliance had finalized the paperwork. Gregory had isolated the funds. Anna had scheduled final reviews with external counsel. No one in the Whitmore family knew yet. Not Edward, not Lila, not Joanne. They were still sending invites, still posting press releases, still moving through life as if I hadn't been holding up their floor this entire time. I received a forwarded email from one of the founders we'd backed in Dallas. Lila had contacted her directly, pitching a Whitmore exclusive partnership for female-led ventures, branding it empowerment through legacy. The irony was almost theatrical. That same afternoon, Edward's executive assistant called my office. Twice. Sarah didn't pick up. She knew better, but she forwarded me the voicemail. Edward's voice clipped and polite. "Just wanted to connect before Q2 closes. There are some refinancing talks I think Cass would want to be looped into. Call me back when she has a moment." Looped in. As if I were a guest on a boat I had quietly built and launched. I didn't respond. Instead, I stood in front of the glass wall of my office. The city below shimmered in late afternoon light. Sharp lines. No shadows. I thought about everything I had done quietly. The deals signed. The people protected. The dignity swallowed. And I thought about my mother. About how she used to whisper when Dad entered the room. About how she wrote her thoughts in a notebook she never showed anyone. About how she died without a name on the company's foundation despite helping build it brick by brick. I wasn't going to follow that path. I walked back to my desk. Sat. Opened Anna's email. Subject: final review. Withdrawal protocol ready. Attachment: PDF 53 pages. Deadline for execution 1 week. I placed my hand over the mouse. Didn't click. Not yet. Because this wasn't just about legality. It was about timing and choice. They hadn't heard from me in days, and silence was its own kind of warning. Would you walk away quietly, or would you make sure they felt the absence you once filled? The invitation came on thick paper, embossed in gold, the kind you keep in drawers, not trash cans. Whitmore Holdings, 30 years of legacy. An evening of gratitude. No RSVP card, just a line. Your presence is assumed. Dress code formal, assumed. As if they still thought I'd show up to watch from the edge of the room. As if they believed I'd nod through another round of applause meant for someone else. This time I did go, but not for them, for the ending. I wore my mother's dress, the navy silk one she'd worn to Dad's first investiture. It still held the scent of cedar and something faintly floral, like a memory that hadn't quite left. Sarah helped me zip it. Her hands didn't shake, but her voice was low. They won't be ready for this. They don't need to be, I replied. This time I'm not asking to be seen. The gala was held at the same hotel where Dad had announced the expansion into the Southeast market. I remembered hiding under a banquet table that night, stealing mini eclairs with Edward. Now I walked in alone. Past the valet, past the press, past the sign that said, "Welcome to the Whitmore era." Inside the ballroom shimmered. Crystal chandeliers, white florals, too many men in tuxedos who still called me young lady in board meetings. No one noticed me at first, not really. I took a glass of sparkling water from a tray and moved to the edge of the crowd, watched, listened. Edward worked the room like a man who knew the cameras loved him. Lila posed beside the projected chart showing growth powered by family leadership. I could see the shape of my own work in those numbers, the code, the logistics models, the revenue from the Dallas partnerships I'd negotiated, all stripped of origin, all repackaged under the Whitmore name. A waiter passed by with a tray of sea salt caramels, my mother's favorite. I took one, let it melt slowly on my tongue. The sweetness didn't linger. Nothing ever does when you're not supposed to be there. But this time, someone finally noticed. Not Lila, not Edward, a junior associate from one of the investment arms I helped secure. He did a double take, then leaned toward his date and whispered. Word spread faster than champagne. By the time I reached the edge of the seating area, heads had turned, one by one, not in admiration, in calculation. What is she doing here? Why now? Why that dress? A few smiled stiffly, a few nodded with confusion. One or two looked genuinely nervous. And then the music faded. The lights dimmed. And Edward took the stage. Spotlight, standing ovation, flashbulbs. He adjusted his cufflinks like a man preparing for a coronation. 30 years ago, he began. Our father built more than a company. He built a legacy. Polite applause. I didn't clap. I didn't blink. He believed in strength in family and vision. And tonight we honor that foundation by announcing our next chapter. I already knew what was coming. Some flashy partnership. Some token empowerment program. Some expansion with my name buried 6 layers deep. But it didn't matter, because tucked inside my purse was a single ivory envelope, unsealed, unfolded, inside one printed letter, one sentence bolded at the center, effective 6:00 a.m. Monday. Whitmore Ventures will no longer serve as capital partner to Whitmore Holdings or any related entities. No explanation, no negotiation, just finality. Edward continued beaming. This company has always been about people, about family, and thanks to your belief in us, we're stronger than ever. He held up a glass. To legacy! They all toasted, smiling, blind, until the MC leaned toward the mic. And before we conclude, one final note from a member of the Whitmore family: we are honored to welcome this evening. His voice shook just slightly on honored. He turned, eyes scanning the room. Then they landed on me. Silence rippled. I stepped forward, no music, no fanfare, just heels against polished wood, a navy dress, and an envelope. I didn't touch the mic, didn't look at the cameras, didn't even acknowledge Edward. I stepped to the podium, unfolded the ivory envelope, and handed it to the MC. He blinked, read it, swallowed, then glanced toward Edward. Edward's smile faltered. His jaw clenched just once. The MC leaned in. Miss Whitmore has asked me to read this brief message. He cleared his throat. Goodbye. Effective as of 6:00 a.m. Monday. That was all. No logo, no signature, no title. But everyone in that room knew exactly what it meant. The servers paused mid-pour. The clinking of glasses stopped. Even the jazz trio fell quiet. I turned without another word, walked down the steps, past the floral arrangements, past the Whitmore-branded ice sculpture beginning to melt. Lila called after me. Cass, wait. I didn't. I walked through the ballroom doors into the hotel corridor, where silence held like velvet. At the elevator, I heard fast footsteps. Edward. Cass, he said, low sharp, not a brother's tone. A man watching control slipped through his fingers. You blindsided me. I turned to face him. He was flushed, breathing heavier than usual. You erased me, I said calmly. I just returned the favor. The elevator dinged. I stepped inside. As the doors closed, I met his eyes one last time. You should start rewriting your pitch deck, I said. Monday's going to be expensive. And then the doors shut. When I reached the street, the night air was crisp, cool, almost clean. Sarah was waiting beside the car. She opened the door, didn't say a word. I slid in, looked out the window at the ballroom glowing behind me, and I felt it. Not revenge, not triumph, just peace. The kind that comes when you stop begging to be remembered and choose instead to be unforgettable. Would you say goodbye in silence or make sure they remember what they lost when you walked away? By Monday morning, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Calls, texts, emails marked urgent. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. At 6:01 a.m., Whitmore Ventures capital withdrawal executed across 7 entities. Bank notifications chimed in one after another. The house of cards didn't collapse, but it swayed hard. By 9:00 a.m., 2 suppliers paused shipments. By noon, one of their key lenders requested updated financials. By 3:00 p.m., the first headline appeared, Whitmore Holdings loses. Major backer leadership declines to comment. I sat in my office, tea growing cold beside me. I didn't feel triumph. Just stillness. Gregory stepped in with a folder. Press is requesting a statement. Want me to handle it? Yes, I said. Just say, Whitmore Ventures has adjusted its portfolio in alignment with long-term mission strategy. We wish all parties the best. He nodded, paused, then added Scott, called twice. That got my attention. Scott wasn't family, not by blood, but he'd been there. During the early years, a quiet ally. Did he leave a message? Gregory handed me a note. Cass, I didn't know. Please, meet me, just us. I folded it once, then again, slipped it into my drawer without a word. Sarah knocked gently, held out a letter, cream envelope, familiar handwriting. Joanne, she said softly. I opened it. Inside was a short note. Cass, your mother would be ashamed of how we handled this. I don't have excuses. Only regret. I knew your father changed the draft, and I said nothing. I wanted peace in his final days. But peace for him came at the cost of respect for you. That was wrong. If you never speak to me again, I'll understand. Joanne, I read it twice. Not because I needed clarity, but because I never expected honesty. Not from her. I folded the letter, tucked it into the same drawer as Scott's note, closed it gently. No response. Not yet, because this wasn't about apologies. Not anymore. This was about weight, and how long I'd carried theirs. By Tuesday, they started asking for meetings. Edward sent a formal letter requesting a renegotiation of structural partnerships. Lila left a voicemail saying she never meant to exclude me. Even Joanne emailed again this time, offering lunch. No one mentioned the will. No one said the word erased. They danced around the truth like it was glass on the floor, and they were barefoot. But I was done sweeping for and I wiping for them. At 10:00 a.m., I had a Zoom call with the board of Feminex Impact Foundation. a nonprofit focused on funding underrepresented women founders. Over 40. I had been watching them for a year. They'd survived 3 funding winters, built a community, but lacked deep operational cash, until now. I looked into the eyes of 6 women on that call, some graying, some weary, all brilliant. I'd like to move 12 million into immediate deployment, I said. No strings, no credit needed, just infrastructure support and room to grow. One of them, Carla, mid-50s ex-banker, now CFO, leaned forward. Are you sure? I've never been more sure. They asked nothing else. They just said, welcome home. When the call ended, I sat still for a moment, hands resting on the keyboard, phone buzzing again beside me, Edward, round 4. I turned it face down. Across my desk was a leather folio, thick with proposals, PR drafts, old partnership reports, all branded with Whitmore Holdings. I opened it one last time, removed my last signature page, shredded it, let the pieces fall like dry leaves. Later that day, a courier arrived at my office, a box inside a crystal plaque. Whitmore Holdings founding contributor recognition, Cassandra Whitmore. Too late, too polished, too clean. I picked it up, turned it over. No date, no meaning, just decoration for a history they once deleted. I placed it gently into the trash bin, then picked up a Sharpie, wrote one word on the side of the cardboard box, returned. On Thursday morning, Edward showed up, unannounced, standing in the lobby of my office building in a suit too formal for humility. Sarah came in first. Do you want me to tell him you're out? I shook my head. Bring him in. He entered slowly, tired, smaller somehow, like a man realizing the walls weren't holding like he thought they would. I don't want this to end ugly, he said. No hello, no apology, straight to salvage. I let him talk. He offered amendments, partial buyback, new board seats, an official apology from the firm, and then the sentence they always return to when they're out of leverage, we're family. That's when I stood up, walked around my desk, not angry, not even cold, just done. I gave you capital, I said. I gave you silence. I gave you a legacy that you passed off as your own. And when the lights were on, you chose not to see me. He opened his mouth. I raised a hand. No more meetings, no more letters, no more brunch invitations. I paused. You said we're family, but family doesn't erase each other to stay in power. Edward's jaw tensed. He looked down at his shoes. I made mistakes, he muttered. That much is clear. I didn't come here to punish you, I said. I came to remember who I was without needing your validation. He nodded once, defeated, or pretending to be. I wouldn't know anymore. I no longer cared. When he left, I didn't watch him go. I just sat down, opened a blank document, typed the title, The Marion Fund, Final Draft. Below it, the mission statement for women erased from legacies they helped build. You are not invisible, not anymore. I saved it, closed my laptop, and let the silence settle, not as absence, but as freedom. Is this justice, or is it finally choosing yourself over family guilt? It's been 6 weeks since I walked away. No press statements, no exposés, no lawsuits, just absence, the kind that echoes louder than confrontation. Whitmore Holdings is still standing, but it's quieter now. The press moved on, the gala sparkle faded, and the phones don't ring like they used to. They're not ruined, they're just real for the first time. And I feel lighter. Mornings begin with stillness. I make my own coffee again. Dark roast black, no sugar, just the way Mom used to make it when Dad was in court and she needed to stay sharp. I sit on the balcony overlooking the Charleston skyline, watching the fog lift from the rooftops. There's a kind of grace in slow mornings, a kind of power in not rushing to prove yourself. The Marion Fund is real now. Registered, staffed, active. Our first grants were sent last Friday. 12 women, ages 39 to 63, all starting over, some after divorce, some after decades in silent partnership, unpaid, unnamed. One of them wrote, "Thank you for seeing me before I saw myself." I saved that email, printed it, framed it above my desk. Because not the money, not the headlines, not even the clean break from my family, that is what I'll leave behind. Recognition for women who kept the lights on while others stood in the spotlight. For the ones who stitched up wounds while someone else got the medal. For the ones who stayed too long because they hoped someone would notice. I used to be one of them. Now I write checks and open doors. Not because I'm generous, but because I remember what it felt like to be invisible. And I made a decision to make sure someone else doesn't have to. The letter came in a child's envelope, purple marker across the front to Aunt Cass. Inside was a drawing, crayons, bright colors, a woman in a navy dress standing in front of a wall of women's portraits. I didn't need a caption. I knew what it was and who it was from. Nina, Edward's daughter, my niece. She was 6 when I took her to my old office, let her play with Post-its, and sit at the head of the boardroom table. She had asked, "Why are all the pictures on your wall, girls?" I said, "Because girls build things too. Sometimes they just don't get pictures anywhere else." Her note was short. Printed block letters. "I told Daddy you're on my wall now. I want to be like you when I'm big." I didn't expect it, didn't ask for it, but there it was, a seed. Planted somewhere no press release or plaque could reach. Later that week, I met Scott for coffee. Not reconciliation, not nostalgia, just closure. He looked thinner, more tired. But his eyes held something real. Regret, maybe, or just recognition. He didn't apologize, didn't need to. He simply said, "You were right to walk away." We talked about nothing for a while. Weather, real estate, books we never finished. Before we left, he handed me a worn envelope. Inside was a photo, Dad, Mom, me age 12 in oversized glasses and a crooked smile, standing between them. On the back in Dad's handwriting, "She'll be the one to change everything." Scott said nothing, just squeezed my shoulder, and I realized. Some legacies aren't written in documents or brass plaques. They're written in what people choose to carry, or finally choose to let go. The Marion Fund launched its public site on a Monday morning. No press conference, no ribbon cutting. Just a quiet banner across the top for women who stayed too long. "We see you now." Within hours, applications poured in. Single mothers, widows, grandmothers starting home bakeries at 58. Former assistants launching consultancy firms after decades of being talked over. I read each one, every line, every name, not because I needed to approve them, but because I never wanted to forget what erasure looks like or what rebuilding feels like. One woman wrote, "I thought legacy was something you inherited. Turns out you can build your own." I stood in my new office, smaller than the last but brighter, windows wide open, walls bare for now. A framed photo sat on the sill, Mom, in that navy dress, smiling eyes squinting at the camera arms crossed like she knew what was coming and was ready for it. I whispered, "You were never just the judge's wife. You were the architect." Some nights I still hear Edward's voice in my head, still picture Lila at the gala. Still wonder if Joanne rereads her letter. But those are just echoes now, not anchors. Because when you stop asking to be remembered, you start making things that can't be forgotten. This story didn't end in court, or in fire, or in scandal. It ended the way silence should, by turning into something louder than applause. A woman who walked away, and never once looked back, wondering if she should have stayed. Have you ever had to rebuild your worth from the ground up because no one else would name it for you? Where are you listening from? And who would you be today if you'd stopped asking for permission sooner? Subscribe to Sophia's Revenge Stories for more true stories of justice, healing, and women reclaiming the legacies they were never meant to lose.